everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and we have a little bit of a catch-up video for you today.
Yes, so every year we try and play as many Euros as we possibly can, particularly because we want to be very well informed by the time we make our best of the year list. And so, as you can imagine, towards the end of the year, around Essen time, where so many of them get released, it's quite a rush. There's quite a lot of games that then we're catching up and playing, and there's a lot of playing that happens at that point.
Yeah, and we played a lot of them, especially over the summer break here in Australia. But when it got to January, we knew we had to lock in our top 10 games of 2024. And we did that. And then a lot of you wrote in the comments that we had one glaring omission, which we knew about, the game SETI. And so, well, why was it missing in the first place? A couple of reasons. One, we got the opportunity to play Galileo Galilei, which was one of 3 designs by this same designer, also set in space, and it didn't really grab us. It didn't make it to our top 10s. But then also, we wanted to try SETI, but it was impossible to get it in Australia, and we didn't go to Essen last year, so we just couldn't get our hands on it. So we actually reached out to CGE, and they kindly have sent us a review copy so that we could tell you, should this game have made it into our top 10 games of 2024?
But before we give the answer to that, let's just catch you up a little bit on this game. So the game is SETI by Thomas Hollick, and SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Essentially, we know that alien life is out there, and we want to be the ones to figure it out and find and eventually make contact. So what we're going to do is we're going to be sending out probes, launching probes into space, exploring different planets, potentially orbiting them, landing in them, along the way, hopefully getting some publicity, which will help us fund different research or research different technologies, so we can be more efficient at all of our different ventures and hopefully find different traces of these alien civilizations until eventually we have enough traces that we can connect, make contact, and discover who they are. And once we've connected with them, we're actually going to be able to interact with them in different ways, depending on which civilization we make contact with. At the end of the game, whoever does this in the best way will be the winner.
Now, I'm going to give you a really quick overview of how the game plays. Essentially, this is a point salad style game, but some of the main core actions that you're going to be doing are sending out these player colored probes that are going to go out to Earth, and then you're going to be able to move them around the spaceport, which consists of these 3 wheels that are going to be turning at different juncture points in the game. But essentially, you're going to move them around to other planets, and then you're going to be able to commit them to the planetary board by sending them out and turning them into orbiters. So they're going to sit around the outside of these planets. Or you can actually turn them into landers and land them on the planets, and that's going to give you resources, it's going to give you some traces of alien life, and it's going to give you victory points which attract around the outside of the board. The other thing that you're going to be doing out here in space is scanning these different segments, which is going to allow you to collect these pieces of data, which is intel about the alien species, and then place your colored markers out on the board to replace them in this area majority style game. All of this is underpinned by multi-use cards which can be exchanged for weak actions and resources, or you can actually spend the cost to play them and activate the action on them or the mission that you can achieve later in the game for great rewards. You'll also be able to upgrade your main actions by using these tech upgrades which slot into your player board and give you a little bit of a boost. The 3 main ways to get traces of the alien species are by moving your probes over to the planetary board, by scanning these segments, or by collecting data. And if you can do all of those, eventually we're going to reveal the 2 modular alien species in the game. They're randomly placed at the beginning of the game, and when they're revealed, they add a mini game structure module to the game that is essentially an overlay of everything else that you're trying to do. Over the course of 5 rounds, the person with the most victory points will be the winner, and we'll talk more about the ins and outs of the mechanics as we talk about how we felt about this game and whether it should have made our top 10 list of 2024.
Okay, so the first thing that I'll say is, as we were learning the game, I realized this is probably one of my favorite rule books I think I've ever seen. I think the first innovation that hit me about this is the way they've laid out the rule book. Instead of it being like, you have lots of text and then a little square image of an example, they actually have like full page spread of the board. So you feel like you're looking at the board and then little boxes of text that kind of show, well, this is how this happens or this is how this moves. And it just immediately, like, it was quite an immersive rulebook.
It was. It was like, really helpful.
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it works as well because this game is fairly easy to teach. At first, it's a lot to take in. It's not a light game. It is a heavy game. There are a lot of options that are available to you. But once you can step through each of those main actions, it's not too bad. And I've found, in subsequent teachers of this game, it's become faster and faster because you work out the order in which you should teach those actions. And in this game, your turns are really simple, which helps because all you're doing is playing one main action, and then you can do as many free actions as you're able. A lot of those are things that are going to help you get that main action done. Now, how does this game feel when you play it? It's like taking a piece of fruit and trying to squeeze as much juice out of that piece of fruit as you can. I'm going to drop that analogy now. To get as many turns in as you can before you need to pass. Yeah. And that is one of the key consistencies or the reasons why people get that feeling of the Lost Ruins of Arnak, which was a much loved game by CGE as well. It gives that same feeling because you are trying to ration those resources as much as possible.
Very tight sort of in the resources, and you're like, oh, there's so many things that I want to do, but I only have these ones. So any little extra bit that I can get feels like, oh yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, because if you run out of resources, you're going to have to pass, and everybody else is going to continue playing until everybody else passes. So you do get those feelings of like, wow, why did I miss like 2 or 3 extra turns and everyone else still has all these resources? And one of the key things that enables that to happen is the openness of how you can use your resources. So I love the multi-use cards and the fact that in the top left-hand corner, they actually have actions or resources that you can use if you discard the card, because the cards themselves are really valuable. You want to hang on to them. Yeah. But the other thing is you can always exchange 2 resources for any other resource. So if I just needed 1 more energy to get something done, I could discard 2 cards, which is really going to hurt. But it enables me to get that 1 extra turn in, which might be the difference between, winning and losing this game.
And even just the thing, like in terms of the sequencing of things, often you might be able to do a few things in one turn that means that it opens up the possibility for another type of action that requires, for example, researching technologies. You need to have 6 or at least 6 publicity. So it's like, oh, if earlier on in my turn, in this sort of round, I'm able to get my publicity up, then that opens up the ability for me to do that extra action. Yeah. And then same with, as you're collecting the bits of data, it's like, oh, well, then I will, as long as I save a bit of energy, I'm going to be able to do that processing of all that so data. So it's like that sequencing with those very few resources is critical.
Now, this game has an interesting blend of tactics and strategy. I would say that there are some things you can control for. It is a point salad style game where maybe you want to try and specialize in a couple of different things and do them really well. You don't have time to do everything and spread yourself out so thin. One thing that's going to dictate that is the missions that you get along the way, because they might help guide what you're trying to do. But interestingly, the centerpiece of this game is really the turning universe or solar system that we have going here, where your probes that you have out in space could actually get moved and triggered by different actions in the game. However, there's no perfect way to predict when that's going to happen. And so at first when I started playing this game, you want to leverage it to your advantage as much as you can. Maybe I'm on one side of the board and I know if I just wait a couple of turns, I'm not going to have to pay to move where I want to go. Eventually I'm going to be pushed around, but I don't really have total control of the timing of that, because when people trade in their publicity to get a new tech upgrade, that triggers the turn of it. Sometimes when people play cards down, that triggers the turn of it. So you can never quite be so sure, and therefore it becomes a bit more tactical as well, because, oh wow, by the time it got around to me, everything's changed and I'm not where I thought I was, and now I need to rethink the sequence of my turn.
Yeah. One element that I enjoyed was this the scanning action, where you're actually able to then, this is how you end up placing your little tokens on the different sectors. And the way it kind of works is you start out with being able to scan wherever Earth is aligned with, plus usually one other card based on, this is the top right sector. So for example, if I were to discard this card from the market with the blue, then I would be able to put my second token in one of the blue sectors. So that's interesting because it means that I enjoy the fact that it's like, oh, I get to put 2 of my little tokens out in these little kind of area majority kind of mini games. But then also there's that a lot of your objectives might relate to make sure that you like have 2 sectors of this particular color, or have have points based on how many different sectors you are at this particular time. And so I enjoy that as something that, even though it is an area majority mini game, because as soon as it's completed, it sort of gets triggered, and that's when you kind of then, everyone who's there gets publicity, but then whoever has the most is going to get additional stuff.
And the other thing about that game is that everybody is incentivized to participate. Even if you are not trying to win the sector, you might be just going there so you can get that incidental publicity, or because you're collecting data that ultimately is going to allow you to get a different type of alien trace. So everyone wants to participate in this game. The other thing is that's where the movement of Earth is really important, because wherever Earth is, that's going to be the first place where you can collect a piece of data and put out your token. So there's all these things to monitor that are going on throughout the course of the game, and you have to really be opportunistic in that. So you might have a card that just happens to work perfectly with the state of the board right now, and what you're trying to achieve. One of these sectors is about to finish, and you could be the one to win that sector, so you might change the order of your actions. But one thing I really like about the design of this game is the way the victory point tracker is integrated into some key aspects of the game. So firstly, there are 2 points at which the first player to cross these in a 2 or 3 player game is going to place out this alternative dummy kind of color that is going to help speed up the reveal of the aliens, which we'll talk about in a moment. The other thing is that anytime a player crosses one of the 3 gold spots at 25, 50, and 70 victory points, that's when you have to lock in one of your end game conditions for this game. And there's 4 of those that are randomly placed at the start of the game. So you're only going to be able to commit to 3 of them. I really like that because it rewards actually the person who's in front. So it's not like a catch-up mechanic where usually, you're trying to help the people behind get ahead. It's like, no, actually, if you get over this threshold first, you're going to get the most points for that.
I think the fact that there's so many of them, it means that then inevitably, there's going to be someone else that passes that threshold after, and then they'll get first dibs on whatever else is left. So it's not like, the first player is always going to get the top spot for all of them.
But I did find sometimes when I was committing to one of those, I was also looking at what is Maggie closest to achieving, and do I want to take that spot and deprive Maggie of points at the end of the game, or take the spot that I think is going to be integral to my own strategy?
I'm always just like, what do I want to do, and what's going to be the best thing that I could pick, because it will it'll inform your strategy as well. It'll inform the focus going forward.
Now let's talk about the aliens. So all players are going to be collecting traces of aliens and kind of committing tokens to get victory points in reward for getting those traces. But once a trace of every type of color is committed to one of the alien species, that alien species is going to be flipped over, and we're going to have to reference a little card that's going to explain the new mechanic that this alien board is bringing into the game, as well as introducing a range of cards related to that alien species that players are going to be able to collect and use most of the time like their regular cards in their hand, but more powerfully.
Yeah. And even tokens as well that end up going on the board, or being able to the extra things that you can actually interact with.
Yeah, and they all have a different kind of mechanic that's sitting underneath them. For example, one of them is a little bit of a pick up and deliver game that you're going to be playing out on the board. The other is like this one here is like a race to the top of the track in order to trigger different bonuses that are placed out on the board. So there's a little twist on each of the alien mechanics. But the thing thing I like most about these modules is also the same thing that a lot of people have criticized. So people who don't like the alien modules have said that they're not complex enough, that you're not put enough meat on the bones, that they're not that interesting. However, I'm someone who really values the fluidity of a game. And I think what's really clever about these alien modules is that they come in at exactly the right moment. You're about, a third to a half of the way through the game, and these aliens are revealing themselves, and at that point we all have to take on a new rule set. But the rule set is not that complicated, and so it allows you to actually quite naturally continue the flow of the game, and you can completely ignore the alien species if you want to, or you can leverage it to better your game. And given the timing, it doesn't interrupt a new teach. So because it comes into the game later in the game, it means that if a new player is learning how to play SETI, they get to have a number of turns, even rounds, where they're getting to experience the core underpinning of the game before you throw more rules at them. And I don't usually like modules in games because of that reason. It makes it much harder to teach. You've got to remember all of that variability when you're teaching the game. But, in this, I just find let's learn it together at the time.
Yeah, at the time. It's like, that's where it becomes not so onerous, because you're like, okay, it's not, and also because it's not affecting that much. There's usually things that if you can leverage them in a clever way, you're definitely going to have some advantages. But as Amy said, you can just choose to ignore them and just focus on everything else that you've been doing. Having said that, though, I feel like it's not in the spirit of the game to ignore the alien life that you've spent the whole time trying to find evidence for. But that's sort of personal preference. Now, speaking of fluidity with this game, let's talk a little bit about player count. Now, this does have a solo mode, but I haven't actually played that, so I won't speak to that. It does have an automa, which I don't tend to enjoy, facilitating automas when it comes to solos, but we have played this at the other player counts. Now, this does have a bit of a challenge, because those resources are so tight and you have to do a bit of thinking, you can have some turns, or many turns, with analysis paralysis, which means the longer the player count, the longer that will take by the time it reaches back to your turn. So you can have some of, there can be a fair bit of downtime in the sense of I felt like it took ages for it to go back to my turn, particularly at the higher player counts. It feels pretty snappy at 2. At 2, it actually
players.
moves.
Yeah, it really does, especially because Maggie and I are so familiar with the game now. It moves pretty quickly, and you can probably finish a game in an hour if you're fast players. But when it gets to that 4-player count, you could be looking at a 3-4 hour game. Our first 3-player game took around 3 hours. So, it's not a light experience. You've got to know that going in. There are a couple of things working against it. One, the AP of just, okay, what am I doing? And then how am I rethinking that now that the game state has changed between turns? The second thing is, if you are early to pass, well, you're going to be sitting there a little while. Maybe you should go and make a cup of tea, because you're going to have to wait until everybody else has played their turns, which is worse at a higher player count.
And now finally, the moment you may have all been waiting for, or you jumped to, if you just use the timestamps. Would this have made it to our top 10 list for 2024? Should I go first?
Sure.
My answer is actually it would not have. So even though I enjoyed this game, I felt like I actually, this is going to be controversial, I actually enjoyed Galileo Galilei more. Even though, obviously, this is a heavier experience, I don't know if it's partly the setting, because as you may know, I don't love space as a setting. But I found that it is a longer gaming experience. I didn't feel the satisfaction of that, the squeeze was worth the juice for me at the end of the day.
The juice is worth the squeeze.
That's the saying, yeah. I'm going to blame my English as a second language, as I always get idioms wrong. Even though I think it's a very, very clever game, and I enjoy my time with it. And so, should we give ratings at the same time?
Give your rating.
So my rating would be a 7.6 for this game. So it's a solid game. But overall, I don't.
That means, it would have made your top 20 of the year. It probably just scraped, not making it into your top 10.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that is an accurate assessment.
Yeah, and now if you've been watching us talk about this game the whole way through, you could probably sense that I really enjoy the mechanics of this game. Do I like the setting? Absolutely not. Does the setting make it harder for me to learn?
The SETI setting?
the SETI setting does make it a lot harder for me because, you know, just the idea of orbiters and landers, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. So that made it trickier to get into. But once I was into the game, I really enjoy the pressure that this game puts on you and that ability to be as efficient as you can be, and like the frustration that comes along with that. I love games that are quite mean to me. And sometimes other people, but mostly to me.
Yeah, the punishing, like, I just don't have enough resources. Why won't you give me more resources?
When you get to the next round or you pass and you're like, oh, I could have done one more turn. That moment, I really enjoy that. So no surprise, this game would have made it into my top 10 games of 2024. In fact, it would have been number 3. And for those of you playing along at home, that would bump out Windmill Valley, which I loved for, you know, what it was, but it's a lighter game experience. And I do enjoy the meatiness of this game. So it would bump it down. It would push out Endeavour Deep Sea, which...
But it was higher on my list anyway, so it would still be... So Endeavour Deep Sea was on my list and much higher. And
but for me personally...
It's still in the house. It'll still stay in our collection.
So quick to come and defend Endeavour Deep Sea. It's now my number 11, but it's, you know, it wasn't as enjoyable for me as this game and the way everything kind of comes together. Now, my top 2 of the year was still Civolution, which was my most anticipated of the year as well. I enjoy the setting more for that one. And my number 2 was Huang, which was my first introduction to that Reina Knizia series, and I really loved it. And because it's so quick and easy to get to the table, I feel like that will just be on rotation in our household for a long time, given the players that we play with on a regular basis. So this makes it into number 3, but that is, you know, quite high regard. My rating for this game is 8.3. I do feel like it is a really solid game set in a universe that I don't care much about. But
what is this? It's this universe.
It starts out in
this universe.
I know, but we're talking about why do we enjoy the setting of something like Evacuation more? Because it has more of the human element. This is really just
Evacuation is really just essentially just moving. It's not really it's not even that much about space. It's just like I need to get all my stuff from one place to the other.
Anyway, we hope you enjoyed us talking through why this made it to my list and not to Maggie's. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.